Cheese. All right, welcome back to That's Some Cheese, part of the Vendetta Sports Podcast Network. Today is Tuesday morning, May 5th. We are going to be talking about the Jordan documentary, Last Dance. We're going to do an episode now, which is halfway through the series, and then we'll do another one after everything is over. So, Jarrod, what's going on?
Not too much, mate. It's nice and dark over here, about 10 p.m. What time is it where you are?
It is just before 8 a.m. here.
Oh, Trey, once again, I apologize for getting you out of bed at stupid o'clock.
I should probably say this is Jarrod Prosser on the line. I didn't properly introduce you. He is our Australian correspondent. He does the power rankings when the NBA is actually on. He's been doing some alphabet stuff now, which I cannot wait for.
Yeah, I'm enjoying that, actually. It's getting me back in contact with some of those 50s and 60s and 70s players that you don't think much about. There's no reason to think about them. So it's a nice little, I guess, reconnection with the history of the game for me.
All right, so let's get right into the documentary. And I guess the first thought that comes to my mind is how big Michael Jordan was. Like, he just feels larger than any athlete ever has. And I was around like 6, 7, 8, so I can remember it, and I actually have a good memory. I remember being 3 years old dancing to Thriller, Michael Jackson. So I have a good memory, but I can't remember everything, and it just feels like he feels so much bigger than everything else, even now.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in my early 40s, and even from the other side of the world, he was the biggest athlete in the world, arguably the biggest personality in the world, bigger than any movie star or singer or songwriter or anything like that. He was the guy that if you saw his face, you went, oh, that's Michael Jordan. Everybody knew his face, whether you were involved with basketball or not. I honestly can't recall certainly not a bigger sports star in my lifetime, but potentially I don't think I can recall a bigger individual personality, a bigger star in any sense of the word in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's just funny how like people compare him to different people, and it just doesn't feel right because he doesn't even feel human half the time. I do have some things written down, and I sent them over to you, but we can kind of go from the hip and see what happens here.
Yeah, go for it.
So I kind of forgot that management sort of ripped this team apart. Do you think the Bulls would have actually won number 7?
I think they would have, but I don't think they would have won it in 99. I think they would have won in 94 if Jordan hadn't have left the game. In 99, it was the lockout season, if you remember. So, yes, it was a shorter season. I think it was 66 games from memory. But the games were so compacted. And you think about the age of the team. Jordan was 36. Rodman was 38, I think. Pippen was 33. Armstrong was 33. Harper was 35. Yeah, this wasn't a young side anymore. They're not young colts running up and down the floor. So those rest periods, especially in those days where teams still practiced every off day or close enough to every off day, the compacted schedule, I think it would have had a pretty substantial effect on the Bulls. So I think it was one of those years where it was tailor-made for a young team to win it. And lo and behold, it was a team led by a young Tim Duncan that did. But the 94 team, I think that was probably the missed opportunity. For whatever reason, Jordan retired, and there's obviously 1,000 different theories out there. The 92 or the 93 team for mine are the best of those 6 championship teams. And given the age profile then, it stands to reason that the team would have gotten, or at the very least maintained its level in 94 Horace Grant was getting better. Kukoc was finding his sea legs by that stage. 94, 95 were his best seasons. So I think they would have won number 7, but not in the sense you were thinking. I don't think they would have won in 99. I think 98 was probably the end of the run.
Interesting. See, I kind of think they, maybe not a lock, but I thought they would have had a chance just because we see it in the documentary in NBA history. It's you got to earn your stripes. And the Spurs never really earned their stripes, you know? They just kind of got the title. And whether it was the Celtics having to beat the Lakers or the Pistons having to beat the Celtics or the Bulls having to beat the Pistons, the Spurs never really got their chance to beat somebody to go over the top.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's almost like an empty heavyweight belt. You see two young boxers fighting it out for an empty belt. But at the same time, I really do think, if you look back to the Utah series, the finals, 3 of the 4 wins were by 3 points or less. So one of the wins was like a 42-point shellacking, but the rest of the wins were close. You know, this was and they only just beat Indiana in the conference finals as well. So this was a team that was the field was catching them. You know, Jordan was ridiculous, but he was aging. Pippen was aging. Rodman was old. Like, this was Rodman's last stand, really. I think in an 82 game season, a regular NBA season, a regular schedule, I think the Bulls would have been the favourites and probably would have been able to eke it out just on muscle memory, I suppose. As Jordan said, and this, I agree with this 1,000,000%, that the team that is the champion should have the right to defend what they have, and that's probably the biggest sin of Krause's reign, is that he had a champion and he threw it away. But I think the compacted schedule would have really affected the Bulls.
I should probably have mentioned this first, but you're a big Utah Jazz fan, which I recently found out. How much do you hate those Bulls teams? Is it rough for you to watch?
It gets easier. But at the time, yeah, my mum and dad used to have to tell me to stop swearing, stop throwing stuff around the lounge room. It was not easy, man, especially that, like, I'm one of these guys that I never leave a game early. If you're winning by, like, if you're winning by 30 or losing by 30, you stay until the end. It's just the way I've been brought up. You support your team no matter what. But sitting there from the other side of the world watching Utah get dumped by 40-something points was masochism. I didn't even know what the word meant at 19 years of age, but it was masochistic. I hated those Bulls for a long time, but you watch them now and you simply have to appreciate how good those players were, how good Jordan and Pippen were, the genius, the slightly deranged genius of Rodman, the out-and-out genius of Jackson and his man management. It was a wonderful team. It's just a shame that they beat my guys.
Yeah. How about one thing that I think is getting under the radar here, and Jerry Krause is getting hammered constantly, but he's the one guy who's like dead and not able to defend himself. Is it possible he's getting a bad rap? Because to me, and I know you don't follow baseball, but Jerry Reinsdorf is the owner of the Chicago White Sox, and he is a cheap MFer. Like, this guy just doesn't spend money, and it's a sport that doesn't have a salary cap. This is the first year, like, he broke the largest contract he's ever handed out in baseball, and it's an $80 million contract. He operates like
Is that a third of an A-Rod?
Exactly. That's the largest contract in their history. Is it possible that Krause is the fall guy, but it's really Reinsdorf that we got to hammer this guy more?
Yeah. Look, Reinsdorf, his let's politely call it his thriftiness transcends sports. It's whether I don't follow baseball at all, but you know that he favours the White Sox as far as, it's almost like the favoured child and the red-headed stepchild. But he still doesn't even spend on the favoured child.
Exactly.
It's just the way he's wired. But as far as Krause is concerned, it's complicated. To quote Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons. Short answer, yes with an if. Long answer, no with a but. You know, you think about his background. He obviously came across in the White Sox as a scout. And as a basketball scout, Krause was brilliant. He was absolutely fantastic. He plucked Pippen with that draft night trade out when nobody expected Pippen to go that high. Similarly with Horace Grant, he grabbed Kukoc before anybody realised who he was. BJ Armstrong out of nowhere. He wanted Dan Marley. He got onto Dan Marley early and tried to shut down his workouts, but Marley quite smartly said, no, I think I can go first round. So all of these players that he picked were brilliant. He was a fantastic scout. Even someone like Brad Sellers, he was, I guess the vision for him in Krause's mind, trying to extrapolate out what Krause was thinking, was for him to become something like what Kevin Garnett became. A mobile 7-footer who wasn't a back-to-the-basket guy. He had wings for feet, could jump out of the gym, had great skills, but he just wasn't big enough to bang down low. So, unfortunately, Sellers wasn't, emotionally equipped to deal with Michael Jordan. But you could see the way that Krause was thinking when he drafted someone like Sellers in the top 10. And that's another of Krause's strengths. He could see where the game was going. The Bulls were one of the first teams to just give the basketball to their wings, to their 2 and their 3, and say, you run the offense. Our point guards are here to play defense and stand in the corner and can threes. So you think Paxson, Armstrong, Craig Hodges, Trent Tucker, all these guys, they were not there to set the table. They were there to get open and hit shots and defend the opposition point guard. Nowadays, that happens all the time. That heliocentric offense of James Harden or LeBron or Giannis. And Krause was a little bit ahead of his time there as well. The downside of Krause, and I can't put it any better than Steve Kerr did in, I think it was episode 1, where he said he can't get out of his own way. If you're setting up a roster on 2K, if you're the GM of a team on 2K, it's all about your technical ability to find the right players. But in real life, you've got to man manage. And Krause was apparently just woeful at it. Couldn't foster a relationship to save his own life. So as good as he was at his job, he was probably almost suited to be the assistant GM. How you get those coaches that are fantastic with the clipboard in their hand, but you get the man manager coach out front. I think Krause would have been better as an assistant GM because he definitely had an eye for talent and he understood the game. He was just a bit of a prick.
Well said. Because it's funny because we look back at these teams, but people don't realize it's not easy to build these teams. How many great teams have the Suns have? It's not easy to do these things. You look at a trade for Pippen, it's like we sort of take that for granted. It's like, no, that's really hard.
Well, you even look at the Bulls. They had a really strong period in the early 70s with Jerry Sloan and Bob Love. They could have had a really strong period with Rose if he didn't fall apart at the seams. But in their entire history, their only real success has come in the period that initial period that Krause ran. And even then, he still had to have somebody else draft the greatest player of all time. It's hard to build a winning team.
Exactly. That was sort of my point with that. Michael Jordan, I think it's really fascinating to see his growth as a player, but not just from getting better. His ability that, hey, my teammates can help me out. And I feel like that's so hard for players to do, where Jordan could have dropped 60 every night in his sleep, but he knew that I got to get my teammates more involved or I'm never going to win. How hard is that? Because we see players today, I still don't think James Harden gets it. Isn't part of maybe going from a very good player to a legendary player is, hey, maybe, I can pass an extra time or two. Because I don't even think Kobe got it until Phil Jackson came. Is there something to that?
Yes, there is, and you've nailed it at the end there, the Phil Jackson part. But before I touch on that, I think it's not so much the player as the environment. Remember, Harden's led the league in assists before. So he certainly has passed the ball and passed it successfully, but his offense is based around him doing stuff. It's one-on-one. Everybody else get to the corners, and if Harden can't get the shot, he'll pass off. It's similar to Westbrook in that first triple-double season. What the triangle had was ball movement and player movement built in. It wasn't static. That was the strength of the triangle. The league has definitely bypassed the triangle now. I'm not going to sit there and say whoever runs the triangle in 2021 has got a leg up.
Right.
But it's in its day, when it was a low post / one-on-one league, the triangle was so different. And it took a while for Jordan to even understand that. It's a relatively well-known anecdote, but it was touched on in one of the early episodes where there was a game where Jordan was trying to do it all and couldn't, and Phil Jackson says to him in a timeout, we need to get the ball to our open teammates. MJ, who's open? And he gets nothing. Stony silence. A little bit more sternly, MJ, who's open? And Jordan venomously spits back, Paxson will get him the ball. And he starts getting John Paxson the ball, and Paxson starts canning jumpers, and they come back and win. But even for someone like Jordan, it took a while for him to understand that there's, you don't have to score every time. The other four aren't there just to play defense for you. So that's the beauty of the Warriors these days. They've got two guys, and when they had Durant, three guys, that if they really wanted to could go for 35 a night. But they didn't, because they chose the team ethic. And the other side of it is Jackson. You touched on Jackson, and I spoke about the man management for Jerry Krause. Phil Jackson was someone who, I don't know whether he was particularly astute at X's and O's, but you think about the offense that he played in the NBA. He played in Red Holzman's Knicks, who were always a make the extra pass type of team. He had Tex Winter on his shoulder. So he had good X's and O's people around him, good philosophies around him. But he was such a good man manager that he was able to put a completely different system onto, and if you'll excuse the pun, the bullheadedness of Jordan. Not many coaches could have done that.
Well said. That's kind of the next place I wanted to go. Phil Jackson, because he's arguably the best coach in NBA history. But what really makes Phil Jackson so great? Because as you said, he wasn't really an X's and O's guy. He sort of learned from Tex Winter and sort of got brought up and was an assistant for a while, and he had really great players. But how great was Phil Jackson? Is best coach ever deserved, or is it not?
He's the most successful coach, so
right.
I guess if the name of the game is to win rings, then he is the best coach ever. Whether he's the best X's and O's, I wouldn't have the foggiest clue. But I think the strength of Jackson, and I learned a bit more about Jackson through the early part of the documentary when they focused on him. I didn't know that he'd gone down and coached in, was it Cuba, I think?
Puerto Rico, I think it was.
Puerto Rico, that's right. And, people are shooting guns on the bench and whatnot. That's just mad shit. But the fact that he had such an unusual upbringing on the Native American reserves, that he played under Red Holzman, he coached in Puerto Rico, he went through the CBA. He's a guy who has, it's a bit of a hot button term, but life experience. And I think that taught him, he wasn't always involved in the NBA bubble. And I think that taught him to take the men that he was coaching and treat them as men. They were there to do a job. They were paid to do a job. He trusts them to do that job. Some coaches are micromanagers calling every play out from the sideline. He figured his guys have gotten to the NBA because they're pretty damn good at basketball, and he's going to trust them to play within his system. I think that was his big thing, that he trusted his guys. He, things like on the recent episode, Jordan's gambling issues, for want of a better way to put it. He spoke to him about him. Jordan explained it. He said, okay, fine, I'm cool with that. If you think you're doing the right thing, I'll back you in. Rodman's little sojourn to Las Vegas. How many coaches would do that? But the answer would have to be one, and that would be Jackson. I can't see another professional coach having the balls to stake their job on Dennis Rodman doing the right thing on a Las Vegas bender in the middle of the season.
Yeah, I think maybe more than anything, he was just a great people person, and that's what made him such a good coach. I want to go back to that Michael Jordan gambling thing, because to me it just feels so overblown. I don't know how to describe it, but these top of the class athletes, we try to pretend that they're perfect. But to me, if his biggest vice is he's gambling, but he's already so filthy rich that it doesn't really matter, who cares? That was my biggest takeaway. Was it overblown to you?
I think so. Like when he says, I don't have a gambling addiction, I don't buy that for a second. I think he did.
Yeah.
He just thought to have a gambling addiction. I've been watching these episodes with my 12-year-old, who is just a basketball tragic. And I said to him after we watched the 6th episode, I said, so, what did you get out of that? Did you learn anything new? And he said, yeah, I had no idea about the gambling stuff and the people that he was associating with. And so what's the message? What did you learn, James? And he said, well, even the best aren't perfect. But bang on, that's exactly right. So everybody's got their foibles. Ultimately, he didn't do anything illegal as far as we know. And, he was having high stakes bets with other people who could afford to make high stakes bets. More power to him. If I could bet $10,000 on a hole of golf, I'd probably do it. But sure as hell I can't.
Exactly.
And with my golf game, I probably wouldn't want to be honest.
No, I can't play golf worth my life at all.
Yeah, I've seen that clip of you having a golf swing, mate. I almost cried.
Yeah, broken back. It's not good. Former wrestler.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the Michael Jordan draft day, because now it seems like what were teams doing? I understand the Hakeem one. He was awesome. Like, you're not going to get a bad rap for drafting Hakeem, but was it really a difficult conversation between Sam Bowie and Michael Jordan? Was it really a hard conversation? Because you just look back as like, this is kids of freshmen winning the national title. Was it really a hard conversation?
Well, on your point about freshman national title, remember Jordan wasn't the main guy on that Tar Heel team. It was James Worthy. So he became this superstar collegiate player, but I think him winning the national title is a little bit overblown. He was the second, maybe third option on that team. It was Worthy's team. But onto the draft, as you said, Hakeem was a no-brainer. Rod Thorne himself came out and said, if we had the number one pick or Elijah one fell to 3, we would have grabbed him. And you draft a Hall of Famer. If you draft a better Hall of Famer after them, so be it. That's just what happens sometimes. The process for the Blazers, the way I see it, was that remember, this is basketball when positions were rigid. It's not like today where everything's fluid and you can play big, you can play like the Rockets, you can mix and match. Everybody had a position and that's what we did. The Blazers had drafted Clyde Drexler the year before, so they had the 2 positions sorted. Their point guard was Jim Paxson, who had just come off consecutive All-Star campaigns. So their backcourt was set as far as they were concerned. And they'd spent 5 years trying to find the next Bill Walton, trying to find their next centre to build around. And at this time, you built from the inside out. You got your centre and then you sorted out the positions around them. So I had no problem, even 35 years later, with the Blazers taking a big. My issue is with Bowie, and it's not because of talent. Bowie was really talented. I think it's his sophomore year, he went 17 and 10 with 3 blocks. The kid could play. Even in his maybe his 3rd NBA season, he was putting up 16 and 7 with maybe 2.5 blocks. The talent was there, but the issue was, even in college, he had major leg issues. And they extrapolated out to the NBA and it pretty much derailed his career. So it wasn't like they drafted him and then he got injured, like, say, Derrick Rose or Jay Williams or something like that. This was a guy that had injury flags going into the draft. So you think about who was drafted or who was still on the board. I mean, Mel Turpin went top 10 and he turned out to be a dud. But you look at the two picks immediately behind Jordan, Sam Perkins and Charles Barkley. You take either of those and we're talking a very different Blazers team. Even Otis Thorpe, who went, ninth or 10th, something like that in that draft, really, really solid pro. I think he played a couple of All-Star games. So there were definitely better options on the board, healthy options on the board. I think Bowie these days, because the talent was there, I think we've got a very, very recent analogue of him in Michael Porter Jr., who was undoubtedly top 3 just based on pure physical talent, but had this really scary back injury. I think these days Bowie would have been tested and tested and tested again, and the top of the draft board would have gotten too scared to take a guy like that and have it fall through Greg Oden style. So I think he would have gone in that 10 to 20 range, because ultimately there, if you take a flyer on a really top-end talent and they just can't get their body right, so be it, you move on. But if you've got the chance to take a franchise-changing player at number 2 and you take a guy who's already injured and he stays injured, you're doing your job in as a GM. You're just asking to be fired.
Well said. Well said there. I want to go to the Dennis Rodman episode because he was my favorite player growing up. I just absolutely loved him. Even
there's an inside into Trey, isn't it?
I don't play pickup basketball very often or at all, but when I did, when I was younger, like in high school and early days in college, I was just like a defensive pit bull, and that was my guy. Just love playing defense. I don't care if I take a shot the whole game. I just want to elbow people and play like Rodman did.
I'm imagining you flying around the court with massive earrings, a lip ring, and a multicolored hoodie right now.
No, I don't have any tattoos or anything like that, but that's just how my brain's wired. I think of how Twitter would react to something like Rodman today.
Oh, man.
And then the hiatus and all of that. How crazy would people get over him today? I don't even know if he would be in the league. Just because of how panicky people would get.
Do you remember the movie Team America?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. I won't go and explain the whole premise of the movie, but they've got these piss take lines in there. It'll be like 9/11 times 1,000, and then they actually do the math. But that's what it'd be like. It'd be, however bad it was at the time, it would be like that plus 1,000. It would be like the OJ chase, but with Twitter. It'd be nuts. Skip Bayless might actually explode on air if that had happened in this day and age, which I'd pay good money to watch, by the way. I can't even imagine what it would be like. And to be honest, even with the 5 championships that Jackson had, these days, I don't think you could let Rodman go and do that. I really don't think you could. It'd just be, politically, it'd just be a nightmare.
There would be cameras all over him during that hiatus.
Oh, absolutely. And Krause would be sitting there going, oh, this is it. Now I've got my reason to get rid of this guy. It'd be a shit show. And having said that, there is one thing that makes me think that you wouldn't need to, and that's that Rodman quite obviously had some pretty deep-rooted emotional and mental issues. That sort of stuff nowadays is far more well recognised and treated. So I think that if 1998 was 2018 and this was happening to Rodman, he'd have 10 years of various psychoanalysis behind him and counsellors and all that sort of working him through it. So theoretically, he might not need to do it, but for the sake of the exercise, my God, it'd be. I can't even imagine what it would be like, but it'd be pretty bloody entertaining. It would be on every single website. There'd be 3 or 4 writers in Las Vegas trying to find Dennis just to write a 500-word blog, and it would get a gazillion hits.
Totally agree. Another takeaway I had, this was on an earlier episode, but the boomers be lying. The boomers are lying how tanking's ruining the NBA now and we can't have load management. But well, we had people on the Bulls trying to get Michael Jordan to sit out. They wanted the tank to get a better draft pick. Just seems like, that stuff kind of happened back in the day, too. That, we don't have to blame teams now.
Yeah, it absolutely did. It just wasn't as, I guess, openly discussed as it was. And this is another thing where you could say Krause is ahead of his time, but he really wasn't, because everybody did it. The only thing was it was not as blatant. You wouldn't shut someone down with a sprained ankle for 3 weeks because you could just tape it up and have them play. And that's what you do. If it was game 20, you just strap it up and let them go. But these days, if it was game 60, you'd shut them down and just go, well, we're in 11th spot in the conference, screw it. Let's get this guy healthy. Let's not risk any more damage, is the official line. Let's move up from 8th to 4th, is the unofficial line. But back in those days, you'd still play them, but the coach might, have a minutes restriction put on them or something like that. It still happened. It just wasn't as blatant.
I didn't have this on the list, but I just thought of this. I think we sort of go, and I hate doing this, but with the GOAT argument, people sort of act like Michael Jordan didn't beat any good teams. I find that ridiculous. Those Cavs teams were really good.
This is my biggest bugbear. Personally, Trey, I think Jordan is the best I've ever seen. But for me, if somebody comes to me with a good LeBron argument or a good Kareem argument, I'm fine with it, because ultimately it's a subjective thing. There's not a definitive ranking to say, well, he's 97 out of 100 in this and Kareem's only 93 in this. It's not 2K. It's real life. We make judgment calls. But to me, they're the three that are in that discussion. And I have an issue if anybody else says that anyone else is in there. But yeah, it's just too difficult to judge. I mean, you could say, Jordan was a wing, 2/3, and LeBron's a 3/4. They're roughly compatible, so it's easy to judge, but it's really not, because the game was so different. These days, Jordan would be putting up 8 threes, probably minimum 8 threes a game, and given the way he was able to improve every other area of his game, I don't doubt that he'd be shooting them at 37, 38%.
He didn't have a three-point line in his college days either, right?
I don't think so, no. I think it might have come in his last season. I don't follow the college game nearly as closely, so I don't know when it came in for college. But if you think about LeBron, if he was learning the game in the 70s and early 80s, he'd be Karl Malone. He wouldn't be this, big, huge point guard who can dribble the ball, shoot three, set people up and bruise down low. He wouldn't have been given the skills to dribble through traffic, to beat a press, to run a pick and roll, because guys who were 6'8", 260 pounds just weren't put in that role. They were told to go and bang down on the block. So he would have been Karl Malone, and it's LeBron. He would have been an all-time great no matter what, but he would have been a different type of all-time great. So it's real for me. It's always far too difficult to compare this apple to this apple, because one of those apples is an orange, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's you just can't compare. The game was far too different. Forget the positional side of it; just the game was too different. But as far as is this player the best? Is that player the best? I'll stump for Jordan all the time, as much as he broke my heart a few times. But I try not to get into that, into big Twitter tirades about who's better, and it's a fool's game.
I just want to go into the teams though, because I've heard people say that, well, he went 6 for 6, but the teams weren't so good. I would disagree with that. We're sort of forgetting those Cavs teams were really good. The Pistons were the Pistons. That Knicks team, I think the Knicks team could have won a title. Barkley was people forget, Barkley was a monster. I thought he went up against great teams. It's just nobody ate because it was Michael Jordan.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Stockton and Malone, those Jazz teams were absolutely brilliant. They were methodical. They were brilliant defensively, but they were remember they ran the pick and roll long before it was fashionable. They were methodical. They were a very modern offense minus the 3-pointers. Kemp and Peyton and Detlef Schrempf in that Sonics team were electric. That Suns team should have won a title. They really should have. That was an awesome basketball team. Even the Blazers were deep as hell. But, it's just anybody who says, oh, he beat a bunch of plumbers or anything like that, or he beat guys who weren't this athletic or that athletic, man, there were some super, super talented teams that he beat. In the 90s, probably the only team that really, I guess, didn't beat a true championship contender was the first Houston title. And that's, not to degrade Ewing and Starks and all that, but that team was not as good as the years before. They had dropped away a little bit, and it took Olajuwon and not much else to beat them. But the Bulls, and again, it's the Bulls. Everybody was coming for them. They had the target on their back. So everybody upped their game to play Chicago, and Chicago swatted them all away.
I even think that Magic team was really good.
Oh, yeah, they were. They were the only thing they didn't have, and it goes back to your point earlier about the Spurs not necessarily paying their dues, being that young team who had to take their punches. Personally, I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory, but the Magic are a typical team that fall into that. They were young and they had success kind of thrust upon them because Jordan wasn't in the way anymore. But they were talented.
I only have one more thing on my list, and then we can pull some of the things you wanted to talk about. Yeah. But still, the most fascinating part is the watching Rodman go after those rebounds. Like, watching him say the ball spin this way, the ball spin that way. I find it absolutely incredible. Will there ever be someone like that again? Because he wasn't just like a good rebounder. Like, he was leading the league by a mile, and nobody was catching him, and he really wasn't that tall.
No, he was 6'8", and he was strong, but he was skinny strong. He really, I mentioned it at the start, Rodman is a deranged genius, and he really was a genius. Like, that little section that sort of clipped section at the start of, I think, episode 3, where he's talking about how the ball caroms off the ring for different types of shooters. How many rebounders would, even Charles Barkley himself, like somebody asked him about it, he said, I just go and get the damn ball. People don't think about it. They might, I guess, subconsciously look at the flight of the ball and go, well, that's going to go to the left. But they don't actively think about it the way Rodman did. The other strength of Rodman's rebounding was that, he wasn't super tall. He wasn't, I suppose, a big muscly beast like a Karl Malone or a Charles Barkley, but he used his gifts, which was his speed, and the fact that he had lightning quick, second and third leaps. You see it so many times where Rodman, it's almost his signature move, that rebound where he goes up with one hand and taps it to space again, taps it to space again, and then claims the rebound. He could only do that partly because he was smart enough to see 3 or 4 steps ahead and to knock the ball to where only he could get it. But he also used his speed and his quick leaping ability to be able to do that and to knock the ball away from those bigger guys so that he could get the ball. That's physical gifts, but it's also a little bit of genius in itself.
What else do you have on the list? Because each episode to me feels like 20 minutes. On Sunday, I actually watched them straight through. I rewatched everything just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I love the series so far.
Yeah, so have I. It's been really nostalgic for me because I was a teenager / early 20s when the Bulls went on this run. So that was when I suppose basketball really exploded into the zeitgeist in Australia. So I've grown up in a basketball family. My family's been involved with the game since probably the 1960s. But it wasn't until the early 90s that basketball became popular here. So for me, the 90s was almost I can't think of the term for it, but it was everybody coming to my church, everybody joining what I already knew. So we started getting Inside the NBA and all those sort of half-hour magazine type programs on. we started to get more games on. We started to get live games rather than take delay games. We started to see teams that weren't Boston or LA. So that era for me, like I just consumed as much basketball as I could. And to see some of the faces and names that you just don't think about, like you see a clip and there's Mario Ellie, and you're thinking, God, I haven't thought about Mario Ellie for 25 years, but there he is on the screen. So it's been really nostalgic for me, and the whole, as you said, it feels like 20 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun, man, and these are fun. It's a really, really well put together documentary.
Yeah, totally agree. I actually thought of one more thing, and unless you have anything else to add, I love the physicality of each game. God, do I miss that. Like, it's not even close to the same anymore. Just watching Bill Laimbeer slug people, like, I love that stuff.
And there's one thing that people forget about Laimbeer, because he is kind of correctly typecast as just a thug. But he was also a thug that went to 4 All-Star games. But he was a good player. Yes, he was a dirty player, but he was a good player. He was a serious basketball talent. And that's the thing. Everybody then, it wasn't just that you would... I suppose it's almost like the hockey theory now, where you've got your one guy off the bench who might come in, give up a few hard fouls to stop, Curry or Harden getting to the basket and then check out again. In those days, that's what the Stars did. The Stars actually put each other on the ground. And I do miss the physicality in the league nowadays. It does mean that we get some absolute highlight moves that we wouldn't have gotten back when I was younger. But there is an element that I do miss. One thing I just wanted to bring up, I thought of it just as you were asking your question about the way one thing I've really liked about how this documentary has been, presented to us. I love that little trope where the interviewer hands the interviewee an iPad or a phone and says, hey, have a look at this. And it might be Isaiah talking, or a video of this, or a clip of that. And you get the live reaction and the instant reaction. I love that. I haven't seen that before. And it gives you a really genuine and raw answer. And that's the sort of stuff I'm really loving out of this. We're getting some very real answers from people that have always been very carefully media crafted.
Yeah, I sort of like paying attention to the way Michael Jordan's drink goes down a little bit each time.
Yeah, but all of a sudden you see it go up again and down again and up again. And you're sitting there thinking, have they taken the clips and put them in different orders? Or is he 5 drinks in?
I'm guessing he's 5 in.
And you see his eye. I mean, his eyes are well bloodshot, so he must be, at least buzzed a little. But I've looked at it the last couple of episodes, and even back when he played, his eyes were kind of bloodshot.
Yeah, it's interesting. Especially how he plays it off that he never drank, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, now he's a party guy now.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't part of the Chicago cocaine bust or whatever it was called in his rookie year. But look, I think Jordan indulged from time to time, and good on him. He earned the right. So.
How about the way they hated Isaiah Thomas? I thought that was interesting. That the most hated man of college basketball ever, Christian Laettner, who people could not stand, made the dream team over Isaiah Thomas. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether the dream team would have appreciated Laettner being on the team, but I can sure as hell tell you they wouldn't have wanted Isaiah, because it wasn't. Everybody talks about Jordan freezing out Isaiah freezing out Jordan, the non-handshakes and all that, but Isaiah had beef with everyone. He was an out-and-out baby-faced assassin. Even now, what would he be now? Probably 60, close enough to 60 years old, and he still looks like he's 45. Just on that, BJ Armstrong still looks like he's about 25.
Horace Grant actually looks pretty good too.
He does. But BJ still, it looks like they've put him in a 2020 suit, but it's his 1996 head. And whatever he's using on his skin, he's got to put that out in the social. He's got to let everybody know. The man's got a great regime going. Anyway, we went off topic a bit. Isaiah, look, he carved out a niche for himself as this little guy who would go above and beyond to do whatever it took to win. And there's consequences to that, both positive and negative. The positive is that he won 2 titles. The negative is that everybody hated him. And, he's got to live with that. You reap what you sow, essentially. And he got 2 titles out of it, so you can't say it didn't work.
Do you ever think there'll be another player like Michael Jordan? I think the one thing that stands out is there was a year where he's the slam dunk champ, the All-Star MVP, the MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. This guy just won everything.
Yeah, I think that was 87, where basically he said, "Oh, there's a trophy. I'll have that. Thank you."
I just think it goes to speak to how great this guy was. He won everything. Nobody's like that.
He was. Yeah, and look, the one thing that I've been reminded of about what he did better than anybody else on the court was his ability to control his body. I've never seen anybody be able to maneuver themselves in split seconds in midair on the ground the way he did. And that was what set him apart. You could knock him down and he'd still be able to make an adjustment as he's falling. And, physically you would say there has to be, like the law of averages says there has to be another Michael Jordan physically. But whether there's a Michael Jordan physically who also has his dedication, also has his intelligence of the game, that narrows it down again. And the other side of it, which I think is completely out of the question, is that there'll never be somebody who captures the attention like Michael. There's, at that time, when Jordan came into the league, we're still in the early stages of the NBA recovering itself. Through the 70s, it was a dark, dark time for basketball. Magic and Larry, along with David Stern, essentially saved the NBA. They basically resuscitated it, but Michael was the one that made it dance. And I don't think, simply because of the strength of the sport, we'd have to plumb those depths again to get somebody else like Michael Jordan, who came along at the perfect time to be the ambassador globally for the game. So the short answer is no. I don't think there will be, but I don't think it's necessarily a player's fault that they can't be Michael, simply because the circumstances won't allow it.
All right, Jarrod. This was fun. Unless you have anything else to add, you have a couple more points to bring up.
I had a couple of little sneaky MVP moments that I wanted to put out.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Middle-aged Carmen Electra.
Ooh.
Yeah.
She still got it.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Speaking of BJ Armstrong's skincare regime, Carmen's doing okay. And this one, I genuinely chuckled at this in the first episode. The first time that Barack Obama is on screen. And it's not Barack Obama, former US president, Barack Obama, celebrity Bulls fan. It's Barack Obama, former Chicago resident.
Yeah, they did the same thing with Bill Clinton, too. I think it was Arkansas resident or something.
Yeah, it's like it could have just been, Warren Jones, former Chicago resident. I absolutely loved that. It was a bit of a low-key comedy moment, but it's something I absolutely loved.
Yeah, I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. There probably wasn't too much else I wanted to cover. I mean, there's stuff that we'll speak about again once we do, I suppose, a full recap of the series. But, man, all I can say, anybody who's listening to this podcast who hasn't watched these episodes yet, what the hell are you doing? This is such an education for younger people for 90s basketball. For middle-aged guys like me, it's nostalgia. It's like Soundgarden or Faith No More touring again. It's reliving your youth. Please watch it. It's a fantastic series.
Totally agree. My youngest brother, who's in middle school, a lot younger than me, is watching it for the first time, and he's just blown away. It's funny to watch his reactions. But
how old is he?
I think he's in 7th grade. 13, 12, something like that.
He's about the same age as my eldest son, and it's the same with James. He watches it, and every time you see Jordan get hit and throw some acrobatic and one in, you just hear James from the opposite end of the couch going, "Oh!" like almost these involuntary noises that are coming from him because he's heard all about Jordan, but he's never really seen Jordan.
Right. All right, this was fun. We will make sure to do another episode after the series conclusion. But I hope all of you guys enjoyed listening to this episode. If you're not watching the series, again, like Jarrod said, I don't know what you're doing. Get your shit together. Anyway, thank you guys for listening to That's Some Cheese. Until next time, we will see you soon.
Tell you something. You know what really grinds my gears? You, America. Fuck you, Diane.